Very good, and thanks, Adner. We also had a very good session this morning with a young Afghan academic and Adner discussing again Pakistan and Afghanistan. So this is my second Left Forum. I was here last year as well. It's good to see, I think last year there was only 1 or 2 panels on Afghanistan, if that. It's good to see 4 or 5. It's not so good that 2 of them are in this time slot. But it's good to see that the left is at least talking about this. But I've been to the States 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years on anti-war related activities, and it's just glaring, and each time I sort of convince myself that I hadn't seen what I saw, and that the next time I will find an anti-war movement and something that can be referred to as that. But it really is just a glaring, striking thing that's missing from having a left in the United States that is meaningful. Just the total lack of an anti-war movement. Not that there aren't organizations, but there isn't a movement that's willing to take up Afghanistan specifically, but even the question of occupation in general. Iraq has just totally fallen off the radar, and the occupation there and the long-term plans. So it's a really crazy and serious thing, and we can get into why that is the case. And there is just a lack of outrage, I find, over these wars, and even within the left and sort of what broadly passes as the left in North America. So now I come from Canada. I'm based in Vancouver, so it's that place that often the American left mistakenly idealizes, and has this mythical vision of a land of free healthcare and equality and milk and honey and peacekeeping. But so I want to tell you that all of that is false, and that's a longer discussion. There are some relative differences, but we face very similar situations. But I do want to say that we have something, at least the shell or the framework of a cross-country anti-war movement that I just wanted to start by just sort of very briefly describing what we do. So I'm the co-chair of the Canadian Peace Alliance, and like I said, that's a very loose network, has 1 staff person, but it does some very basic things that I think are essential for you to have here in the United States. I'm not saying these things don't exist, but they exist. If they do exist, they're in silos and groups with not a very broad reach. So one thing we do is we collect weekly basic information, key articles that progressives need to be aware of, key developments in Afghanistan. We have someone blogging on that, and we send it out each week. So a basic weekly newsletter information of what's going on. We try to have regular educational forums so people know about Canada's militarization, Canada's role in Afghanistan. Once in a while we still do the National Days of Action, but frankly they're few and far between now, but at least they happen once in a while, like a serious national mobilization. We've also tried to put a premium on highlighting progressive Afghan voices, and obviously my tendency is to talk a lot about Malalai Joya as I worked with her on writing her memoir, but I think she really is an essential person and an essential story to tell to progressives in the United States about this war in Afghanistan. So we've done a lot of work. We've had her on tour basically across the country twice. The last time was launching her book. And we've also brought speakers such as Sonali, who very sadly looks like she's not able to make it today. We don't know, but Sonali Kolhakhtar was supposed to be on the panel today. So we'll put up her website. She's one of the primary people in the United States that fundraises for RAWA, Revolutionary Association of Women of Afghanistan. So in Canada as well, we've tried to highlight the statements of this group, some of their work, because they are few and far between, these stories of Afghan women themselves expressing their opposition to fundamentalism, but very clearly expressing their opposition to the Karzai regime and to the war and occupation. So I think that's a key part of our job. So on that note, I did mean to pass around a flyer about the book. You can get it at the Haymarket table. Maybe we're supposed to save the ad for later. And also this really, not a very good pamphlet, but it's advertising the blog. We can be honest. But it's advertising the blog, which has a really clunky name, stopwar.blogspot.blog. But I'm telling you, it's just one guy in Vancouver, a friend of mine, doing it. But I don't know of anyone else who's following the entire English language press on news on Afghanistan and compiling it and putting it together. It's crazy that this is the best source I can point you towards, because we really need better research capacity. We need more work like this being done, just basically following the press, let alone following the Farsi press or the Afghan media such as it is. The other thing we've tried to do, and I'm sort of starting with this because I hope in the discussion everyone will talk about what they're involved in and what they think the anti-war movement in North America needs to do going forward. We also try to do solidarity by fundraising for legitimate grassroots projects in Afghanistan. And this is an area that's really undeveloped. We haven't done much in this area, but I think it is important because we're dealing with this vast, bloated machine that is the NGO sector, that is explicitly pro-war, pro-occupation. In fact, most of these big NGOs have an explicit policy of not criticizing any aspect of the war, which is just an incredible disaster for the whole concept of humanitarianism in the world. And it's just crept along. This wasn't always the case, that big so-called humanitarian NGOs, people doing humanitarian projects in a country, would explicitly endorse a military occupation or even hold back from any criticisms. It's quite astonishing. And one of the NGOs worth mentioning, they have a representative speaking in the other panel right now, is Women for Women in Afghanistan. So they attract a lot of people who just genuinely, they read The Kite Runner, or they see the movie The Kite Runner, and they want to do something. And for a lot of people in a lot of places, the first group they're going to run into is Women for Women in Afghanistan. And on the surface, it sounds great. But what they're getting into is a vast organization, one of whose main purposes is to promote the war and promote U.S. foreign policy generally. So the reason I think the anti-war movement needs to take fundraising and solidarity projects seriously is to offer an alternative to this, to say, here's our vision of international assistance, of a true humanitarian foreign policy. So we've done really modest projects around this. Just to give one example of what you can do, though, if the money is being spent properly and not going to pay a middle-class American salary, not going to pay the contractors that go along with the NGOs. In 2007, we had Malalai Joya for a cross-Canada tour, and we managed to raise $40,000 after costs in all the different cities. So with just that $40,000, was able to, in Farah, Afghanistan, where Malalai is involved with a medical clinic that gives free medical service to people in that province, they were able to, well, first of all, the money went to them, and then they got to decide what to do with it. It wasn't some Westerner advising them on what project they needed, or where they needed a school, or where they needed a hospital. We gave the money to their organizations, and they said, what's most urgently needed now is an expansion. Basically with the money we sent them, they built an expansion which served as a waiting room for the hospital and medical clinic. In the past, people just waited out in the streets, sometimes for days at a time because of such a shortage of doctors. So money spent properly and building those relationships can actually go a long way, both towards things that people need in Afghanistan and towards undermining the arguments of some of those liberal interventionists. Just generally, I just sort of want to talk a little bit about, I thought we'd have Sonali here, and I've also been at a lot of sessions where the people speaking take up the whole time. And I know a lot of faces here, and I can guess that we have a lot of expertise and experience in the room. So that long-winded way of saying that I intend to be brief here. But yeah, when a leftist tells you they're going to be brief, that's the red flag, right? But no, I'm sure Tom's going to hold me to it. I wanted to just talk a little bit about what I think is the reality of the Afghan state, such as it is, the state and government that the US and NATO war is propping up. Because I think essentially we have failed to counter the narrative, the dominant narrative, the dominant story, if you will, to avoid Pomo lingo. Yeah. The dominant story out there is that, for all its faults, this is a military intervention that is trying to prevent some really nasty, ghoulish, medieval people from coming back to power and re-imprisoning Afghan women. And it's not just the fact that the Kite Runner has mass distribution, it's not just the power of the corporate media